Right. Hey, folks. So today's topic is going to be deloads. And I thought I'd just run through my thoughts on deloads. I'm in the middle of deload week right now. And with the extra time, I thought it'd be a good idea to talk about this. It's something that people have asked me about, but it's not a topic that I find to be particularly compelling, just because it's just something that needs to be done. But I guess it's worth padding out to help people know what to look for, what a deload is comprised of, how to use it in the grand scheme of things, like whether you're using Conjugate or Undulating or whatever else. Okay, so let's talk about it. Firstly, I think the best thing to begin the discussion with is what to look for. So when do you know you need to deload, right? So I'm going to run through some scenarios which for me are fairly consistent in terms of signs of knowing when I need to deload. I'd say the first one is I start to pick up aches and pains. Yeah. And not just being old, right? So I start to get like little aches and niggles, like maybe elbow starts hurting, shoulder, whatever, knees, all that kind of stuff. And it's not something which is a consistent pain for me, but when I'm due a deload, then I start to pick up some type of niggle. Something happens. And it's the type of thing where if you were really focused, you would just forget about it and just carry on with your path and carry on training and sort of go through the pain. But you get a couple of these signs which come up together, and the sensible lifter will think, okay, let me just back off here. So firstly is aches, pains, and niggles. I don't think people should be training in pain for the large majority of the time. I've done a lot of that in the past, 10 years ago or so, and it's not great because ultimately it's going to slap bang into an injury at some point. So training through pain and stop being a wuss and all that kind of stuff is it makes for a good YouTube video, but I don't think it's sensible advice ultimately. I like to think most people who, at least are my clients, who I keep an eye on, they train hard. I check their videos and most people train hard. If you're serious enough to, hire someone, if you're serious enough to potentially look at some YouTube videos, and you probably train pretty hard, so I think it's not always a case of just telling people to train harder. I think it's one of those where it's not okay to train through the pain because ultimately that's going to slap bang into an injury. So first thing is aches and niggles. Second thing is illness. I tend to find in my younger clients, or the ones who are more robust, they don't tend to get the aches and pains just because they're too young, and so they just get ill. So they get ill, they get pick up a cold, something like that. Rather than getting an injury or a pain, they just come down with some kind of cold, something like that. And the immune system tends to get compromised. So that's another thing to aim for, to look out for. The next thing is sleep. Sleep tends to get affected. I think, and this goes hand in, there's two things that go hand in hand with each other. In my experience, sleep tends to suffer. And because sleep tends to suffer, another thing happens, which is I tend to want more junk type food. It's really weird, but that's just me. I mean, you guys, you might relate to that, you might not, but I find when I'm having poor sleep, it's usually because I need a deload, and when I need a deload, I'm generally looking for more processed types of foods, sugary, fatty, whatever. So that's another couple of signs. Now, I always track my heart rate and blood pressure, and I noticed that before I need a deload, those two markers go up ever so slightly. So that's something to watch out for as well if you track those metrics. And I think, if you're a little on the older side, middle-aged to old, I think you probably should track those metrics, regularly. So that's another one. I think the final one for what to look out for is an actual strength decrease. So I noticed this last week, which was the last sign that I needed to say, okay, you need a deload. And that was, I went into restart a block of squats, so like a 3-week wave of squats. And I noticed that the beginning weight just felt really heavy. So I thought, okay, I definitely need a break. So this week I'm deloading, and it's the culminative signs of quite a lot of things coming together, thinking, okay, you need a break. So that's kind of what to look out for, so all those factors. The final one there was an actual strength decrease. So this brings us on to the question of whether to use reactive or proactive deload. So the way that I'm talking about it is you're sort of sat there and you're looking for signs. You're noting down signs and you're trying not to ignore your brain telling you to go, go, go. And you're actually thinking, okay, well, I got an elbow pain the other day, didn't sleep very well. I'm a lot hungrier than normal. Maybe adding these together to say, okay, maybe I need a break. So if you do this on a regular basis, and you actually write down your training diary, which you should be keeping, and you sort of map it out, or even if you have one of those apps these days, you can do it all on your phone, and you look through the calendar, you should start to notice a pattern. And that was one of the first things I did. I've told the story lots of times, but back in 2003, whatever it was, I wrote to Dan John, and he gave me some advice, and he wrote back and he said, Faz, try and find some trends about when you start to hit a wall, and that's when you know to take a deload. And I realized as I look back, every third week something would happen, and I would come down with a cold, or I have an ache and a pain, and I needed a break. And so that was my first indication that I should deload every 3 weeks. Now, I've had these conversations with coaches here in the UK, and the conversation, and so I'll always defend proactive deloads because I think they're very valuable. A lot of coaches look at reactive deloading, and so they look for the signs and they say, okay, well, I know my athlete, so when he gives me the signs, then I'm going to give him a deload. The problem with that is, as you guys know, we as lifters, we're not very good at listening to signs, right? So if things are going well, we generally want to keep pushing and pushing and pushing. But in my experience, the times when I'm feeling the best and I've had the best run of training is normally what precedes something happening in the gym, like either an injury or some kind of ache and pain developing. And that is traditionally usually when I ignore it, I carry on right through and I eventually get injured. I'm joking, of course, but it's one of those things where, like, we as lifters, we're not very good at listening to the signs. So if you map it all out, if you map out your last 3 months of training and start to look at where you see the periods of time where, okay, look, I felt like I needed a break. I had a deload then. I felt like I needed a break here. I felt like I needed a break here. And if you're doing it right, if you go through and you're taking enough notes, you should be able to see some trends and patterns. As long as your training is staying fairly consistent, like if you're always training roughly 4 times a week, if your life is relatively stable, you should start to see some patterns. You know, even me at age 23, my life wasn't exactly stable as it is now. I could still see some patterns in when I needed to deload. So if you deload proactively, so that is before you are absolutely trashed and hurt, then, well, that means you can slip in a deload before you really get trashed and then get back on with your training, and you don't lose any ground. One of the conversations I was having with a UK bodybuilding coach a couple of years back was this argument, and he was saying, well, he listens to his athletes, and I was saying, well, I was making my point, that is, you can preempt a lot of injuries. He's like, no. If you listen to your athlete, if you have a good relationship with your client, you're good to go. And the next week, one of his clients tore his quad off his bone. So I'm like, well, there you go. Not saying you definitely would have avoided the problem, but it's not always possible to listen to your athlete because your athletes aren't always going to tell you. They just want to train. And if things are going well, they train. So I like proactive deloading for that reason, because you can preempt a lot of this. And having 1 week of training, which is a little bit of a down week, in the grand scheme of things, it's not the end of the world. Like, I'm not suggesting people should stop training altogether, but there are things you can do to ensure your training in that period, it's productive, you're keeping your level of fitness high, but you are giving your body a break. And we'll cover those in a moment. So in terms of the next thing to talk about is purpose of the deload. So then, why do we deload? And that kind of ties into how we deload. What we're deloading for is we're trying to just reduce the wear and tear on our body. We're trying to get a bit fresher, and we're trying to feel, we're trying to get our fatigue back to the point where we can get to being trainable again. So purpose is to get fresh. Okay. Now, for that reason, that sort of ties into what we deload and how we deload. So let's take it through various approaches. Let's start with the conjugate style approach. Now, with a conjugate style approach, probably one of the most effective ways I found to deload when you need it, or whether you're doing it reactively or proactively, is to simply take out the ME and the D work. So take out your maximum work, take out your repetition work, not your repetition work, take out your dynamic work, take out your maximum effort work, and just leave in the repetition work. So just basically have a bodybuilder week. One of the best ways to do it. And often what I'll do is I'll just have people doing something like 4 sets of 20 on various exercises throughout the week, because that way you're still training. Okay. Now you might train less days a week. So let's say you're in 3 or 4 days a week, you might be in twice. and that might be 2 full body routines, whatever, let's say. So you're still in the gym, you're still putting in some work, your fitness remains relatively high because you're doing challenging sets of 20, even though they are sets of 20, so the weight is lighter. And then you rest yourself from the really hard work, like the ME stuff, which is obviously tiring and taxing on the joints and the ligaments. You're also resting yourself from the DE work, which is on the main lifts, which you're trying to improve, so you're not hammering away at those all over again. So that's one way that I would do things for like a conjugate style. Now, if you're doing something like an undulating style periodization, so something like my wizard routine, where you've got heavy, light, medium, and potentially more days, right? That's when I would typically use a block style program. So you would probably purposely work in, I don't know, 3 to 4 week blocks. And I would encourage you guys to try and find when you need a deload. So let's say you're consistently on a 4-day a week, heavy, light, medium, light style of routine, okay? Training, months on end, you can consistently look back and see, okay, when did I need a deload? And then start to preemptively arrange your blocks so that you're taking a deload before you get hurt or injured or whatever. Sensible way of doing things. So if it's undulating, I'd go block. If it's conjugate, I'll just carry on working your waves and then insert a week every now and again where you just don't max and you don't do your dynamic effort work. Yeah, pretty much. I'd get, yeah, as a last note, as a cautionary note, I'll just warn people off trying to continue to do reactive deloads for the rest of their training careers. Try and get to the point where you know your body well enough that you know when it needs a deload, so you can deload proactively. So you know, okay, I know that when I'm training in this manner, with this calorie intake, I can train for 3 weeks before I need a deload. If you get to that point, it just makes the whole process so smoother, because you never flirt with that danger zone of thinking, oh, I feel like crap, and you start to second guess your program. You start to get niggles, injuries and stuff, and it just throws you off balance. You just don't get to that portion of the routine. You're always focused. You're always motivated. You know, it's just better. And one last thing I should say is be aware that when you're dieting, your frequency of deload should probably go up. Okay, that's a question that people ask is, you know, should I still take a deload when I'm cutting? Actually, you're probably going to need to take more deloads when you're cutting, just because your tolerance for exercise will be less. So you'll get fatigued quicker, basically. So whereas previously, it doesn't always work quite this simply, but previously, maybe if you needed 4 weeks before a deload, you might need 3 before a deload. It doesn't always fit in that precisely, but you know, it's something to watch out for. Just be aware of it. If you take a deload a week earlier and it still allows you to train heavy throughout, then you know it's okay. It's not the end of the world. So yeah, hopefully you guys thought that was interesting, benefited from. That's my experience of deloads, training myself and a lot of people, and I think I've covered pretty much everything about deloads in that. So hopefully you found it interesting. But in any case, let me know what you thought below in the comments, and if you have any questions for follow-up videos, happy to hear those as well. All right, take care. I will see you guys